Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. At Petra Coach, we continue to work hard every day to fill our core purpose of positively impacting 10 million human beings. Beyond our normal coaching services, currently, we are creating as much content regarding COVID-19 and how we can all navigate these challenging waters. If you go to our homepage at Petra Coach, you'll find our COVID-19 Business Disruption Center. You'll see all of our prior webinars with John Spence and Jack Daly, our town hall featuring a variety of experts, and Jennifer Spott talking about how to steer the ship. We also have a variety of blogs and articles with information and details from the Family First Response Act to the SBA emergency loans. Currently, 2 of our team members are working to get the information on what was passed through the Senate last night to bring you the details that you need to know. We'll look for that info shortly. Now more than ever, the world is examining how companies treat their employees in times of crisis. By providing your employees with a process and a plan to address COVID-19 and possible exposures, you're caring for both your organization and your workforce. In this webinar, we have a team from Company Nurse. We have Clinical Manager Sheree Lindquist, Chief Technology Officer Henry Slendad, Deborah Spammer, Vice President of Business Development, and President Paul Binsfeld, to discuss how to protect our workforce from COVID-19. They'll cover what are we dealing with, learn about the symptoms of COVID-19 and the emotional impact on your employees, resources for employers, understand preventive measures, and what actions we should take when somebody in your organization tests positive for COVID-19, and a technology checklist, the tools you need to allow for business continuity. Throughout, we're going to allow you to ask questions. So use the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom and follow to submit any questions you might have throughout. A little on Paul. Paul is the founder of Company Nurse, the premier nurse triage service for workplace injuries established in 1997. Paul has received a number of honors over his career. He received the Hall of Fame Innovator Award from the Business School Lausanne for creating a niche segment in the workers' compensation space where this did not exist. He is also recognized as an authority in the industry and participates in speaking engagements for the Entrepreneurial Insurance Symposium, Workers' Comp Executive Forum, and Entrepreneurs Organization Leadership Global Conference. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you to Andy and the entire Petra team for inviting us to share our experiences through this COVID-19 situation that we're in right now. As Jason mentioned, Company Nurse is a 24/7 nurse triage line for workplace injuries. We've been in business for nearly 23 years, and prior to that, I had another 10 years in the workers' comp industry, so I'm known as an expert in that area. We've been in business for 23 years. We're very knowledgeable in the workers' comp area, as well as the mitigation of workplace injury risks. However, over the past month, we've been really doing a deep dive in terms of the COVID-19 issue, specifically on needs presented directly to us by our customers for their businesses as well as for their employees. In the last, month since March 1, we've had over 300 phone calls, and that is just like the curve that we're seeing on COVID-19 exposures. That curve on those phone calls is growing dramatically. So we've got quite a bit of experience in helping employers deal with these situations. Today, we want to share our experiences that we've had through this process with you in hope that we can help you to mitigate your exposure and your risk related to COVID-19. And if you have exposure, our goal is to give you some advice on what to do, best practices, and where to go for up-to-date information. Please note that the information is changing daily, as I'm sure you know, by watching the news and watching the CDC website. Today, I have Sheree Lindquist, our clinical manager, and Henry Svenblad, our chief technology officer. Sheree's background is that she's been with the company for a year now, became our clinical manager in May. Sheree has received her Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from Grand Canyon University. She's a certified case manager with a background in family practice, home health, and occupational health nursing. Prior to working at Company Nurse, Sheree worked as a field case manager in family medicine program at Honor Health here in Phoenix, Arizona. Henry Svenblad has been with the company since 2017. Henry draws upon 25 years of experience leading technology teams, having held positions as CTO, VP of Technology, and Group Director of Infrastructure Services, among others. Through these positions, he has designed market-leading technology, run successful technology implementations, and been responsible for key strategic and technology decisions and controlled large IT budgets. Also has a good background in healthcare before company nurse. Also on board, we have Deborah Spamer, our VP of Business Development, to be able to answer some possible questions regarding certain issues that we're going. So I'm going to turn it over to Cherie to talk about the clinical issues. And then after that, Henry's going to talk about infrastructure technology issues related to COVID-19. Cherie.
Good morning, everyone. So I wanted to start today with just an overview on what we're dealing with COVID-19. We're hearing a lot of things on the news, and I just want to go over basically what the symptoms are and how they might differ or be the same from general cold symptoms. So with COVID-19, you would have a fever of 100.4, a dry cough, shortness of breath, and severe body aches. The reason I want to list those out at the beginning is it's really similar to other illnesses like the flu or a cold or even allergies. So runny nose, sneezing, sore throat, things like that, even if they have some of these other symptoms, aren't necessarily COVID-19. However, we're all a little bit hyper aware of those symptoms right now. So it's really important that if yourself or your employee is feeling ill, that you ask those basic questions. Are you having these things? And then you can always use the CDC, and I'm going to say it a lot today, use the CDC as a resource for things to look for as far as symptoms, what to do, who to call. The flu is really prevalent right now, especially influenza A has almost all the same symptoms. So just because an employee has these symptoms doesn't mean they have COVID-19. Now, the next thing I wanted to go over is how is it spread? Again, very similar to the flu. It's a respiratory droplet, which means you would have direct contact with an infected individual, like literally touching them or providing care of them. If they were to sneeze or cough and that went through the air, that would be another way that you might be able to come in contact with it. The last one is touching a surface. Now, this is very, very low risk, but it's still there, and it depends on how long it has been since the infected person touched the surface to when the next person touches the surface. So the reason I bring that up is things that you can do and that we've done here at our office to protect yourself and your staff is wipe those areas down that are high traffic areas. Doorknobs, the doorknob on the way into the office, a water cooler, coffee pots, someone's desk. Those things should be washed at least twice a day. And those are things that you can do to protect yourself all the time, not just for COVID-19. The other things that you can do to protect your staff are good hand hygiene. I know everybody's seen this on the television. Dr. Fauci's been, producing all of the nice little videos on how to wash your hands, but still remind your staff, wash your hands, 20 seconds, sing the happy birthday song. If you're not washing your hands for 20 seconds, you're not washing your hands. So that's a big thing to make sure that you're remembering. The other thing is have your employees stay home if they're sick. If you're sick, not every business is able to do remote work from home. So, you do have to go in the office. If they have a position where they have to be in the office and they're sick, they should be in their own area, separate side of the office. Again, trying to minimize any respiratory droplet transfer that they might have. The other thing, and I know that everybody's heard it, but proper cough etiquette. This necessarily is not the right thing to do. You should go into a sleeve or use a Kleenex if possible and throw it away. Don't use it again. All of this stuff is on the CDC website. There's some great videos if you want to use those to send out to your staff. They're 2 to 3 minutes long. Very nice information. And then lastly, you can try to work remote if possible. I know not possible for everyone. Here with our company, we've been pretty lucky that we were able to do 100% remote very quickly. So that's just
Sheree,
yes.
Yeah, sure. Let me ask you a question real quick. What about for companies that don't have that possibility? You're right. Company nurse is able to do remote. Petra Coach has been able to do remote. But what about companies such as manufacturing companies and construction companies? What kind of recommendations do they have, or do you have for those type of organizations?
Great question. So depending on the environment, the areas should be disinfected, and the CDC recommends this as well. I've got some links in the PowerPoint that'll go out after the presentation. You should be disinfecting high traffic areas at least twice a day. Manufacturing shifts, sometimes those are 12-hour shifts. So I would take that as every 4 hours, wipe it down if you can. If it's only the one person using it, twice a shift is fine. If you have multiple staff members coming in and touching the same things, you really should be wiping every time. Gloves are in high demand now. If you have access to gloves and you're able to use them, especially if somebody is sick, wear gloves. Change your gloves if you're going to a new area. If you're wearing gloves and you've touched a contaminated area and you go to another area and touch an area, you now contaminated that area. You protected yourself, you haven't protected the next person coming behind you. And then separating those that are sick. Manufacturing, office, it doesn't matter. If you have someone that is sick, they should be staying home. I know that there's critical roles, that's not always possible. And then that's where I was mentioning possibly putting them in a different workspace if possible. And that's not just for COVID-19, that's for the flu in general as well. I think this has been a good reminder that we need to treat the flu just as seriously. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on is all of the media that we're seeing and fear is really creating a huge emotional impact on employees. They're worried about, will they have a job? Are they going to get sick? Are their parents going to get sick? Who's going to teach their kids at school? Who's going to watch their kids if they are able to still go to work? It creates a lot of fear, not only regarding health, but also of their finances. If a person is emotionally stressed, they're going to be more likely to get sick as well. So it just kind of snowballs into the things that will make their life much harder. So things that we have done here at Company Nurse to help our employees, and that I think would be beneficial for any business, is to make sure you're providing resources for your employees. If you have an employee assistance program, companies like Magellan, et cetera, they have mental health counselors that can just listen to the fears that they're having, provide financial assistance ideas. Things that not everyone thinks about in moments of stress is, can they call their mortgage to get maybe the mortgage deferred for a few months? Can they call their car payment loan and do the same thing? Student loans. Student loans are zero interest if they're federal right now, but you can also call and get them deferred for up to a year right now with no change in their credit. If you add all those things together, especially if they're worried about their finances, that takes a huge load off of them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sheree. I know that for Petra, we've been working with a mindfulness coach that has made herself available to all of our members and really to the general public 3 times a day to help support people, because being mindful and getting relaxation. I know this morning I actually went out. It's a beautiful morning here in Phoenix. I actually went outside and did my mindfulness practice outside for the first time in quite a while, and it felt great to do. Yeah, we do have a question. I want to kind of go back before you move too far forward. Somebody asked a question. Rick asked a question. How about home remodeling that requires entering customers' homes? What are your thoughts on that?
The thoughts are, you don't know what you're walking into, but then again, you don't know what you're walking into going to the grocery store. You don't know what you're walking into anywhere. Safe distance needs to be continued until this is kind of quelled down, which is what the CDC is recommending. Home remodeling, my husband did construction for a long time. I know you're really in those personal spaces with the customers. Who knows what their hygiene is like when you're not there. If it's a job that can't wait, that has to be completed. Wear gloves, don't touch your face, good hand washing every time you can. If the customer is sick, you probably shouldn't be there if possible. I know that there's certain things, what if the roof is completely open and you have to put their roof back on? They can't live without a roof. You do the best that you can. And then when you, just like they're doing in the healthcare system, when you leave that home, best case scenario would be you go home and you take off those clothes and you put them right in the washer and dryer don't hug your children, don't sit on your couch. There is that really small risk of the virus transferring from clothing to other objects. Go home, wash your clothes, take a shower.
Is that for, you think, are you suggesting that for everybody? Everybody that goes outside and goes somewhere?
No, close contact, if, for example, they're in that home remodeling system, or example, and they're with somebody who is sick and they still have to go do the work. Yeah, and the same thing is with healthcare workers. They're taking care of folks who are sick. Going to the grocery store, no, you do not need to change clothes when you go home. You should wash your hands, definitely, but that's not necessary. So along with the mindfulness that you mentioned before I go on to the next thing, Jason, is make sure that you're encouraging time for themselves. If you are a business that you have employees working from home, the work-life balance may get a little more off kilter than normal. They should have on hours and off hours. They need to have time to have their lives, get outside, get fresh air, things like that. It's very important. If they have a hobby they like to do, encourage that. I do think that these reminders coming from someone higher in management is also helpful. It lets them know that whether it's the CEO or a supervisor or a manager, that they understand that these times are stressful. So the other thing that I wanted to definitely put in here is a variety of resources. I've mentioned the CDC. That website gets updated almost daily. You just don't know exactly what's been updated. So when you have a concern or you have a question, just have that CDC website saved as a favorite. If you want to make someone the contact person or the person that's in charge for your business, that's helpful so that they're really familiar with how the website works. It's pretty user friendly, but make sure that you're looking at that CDC website ahead of time. The key is to be prepared for questions your employees might have, questions that your customers might have, and then be prepared for what happens if and when you get your first positive case within your business, okay? So if you have an employee that is symptomatic, whether it be those flu-like symptoms, COVID symptoms, cold symptoms, everyone is asking us, will they get tested? Now, I've done a slide on this specifically because I think all businesses would benefit from this information. It's on the news, but I still wanted to put it on, that testing eligibility is determined by medical providers only. What does that mean? It means that if they don't have any symptoms, even if they're worried, they may not get a test. If they were exposed to a positive person, a confirmed positive person, they may not get a test. If they have mild symptoms, even if it's a fever, they still may not get a test. If they're severely symptomatic, they're definitely going to get a test. But that's a question that I think all businesses are asking and employees are wondering. What does that mean for you? You would still want to separate them if they're sick. So it doesn't really change anything that you're doing as a business. If someone is sick and they go home, you're going to clean their workspace. If they're sick and they are able to stay home, that's great. It doesn't really change anything as far as what you're doing as a business. Now, if they're symptomatic and you feel or this is where it gets a little confusing, and that's why I'm hesitating as I'm talking about it. The CDC has a guideline on what you should do if someone has symptoms and if you think it's COVID-19. If they're symptomatic, the CDC website may tell you they should self-quarantine for 14 days. It does not mean they need to see a doctor. It doesn't mean that they have it. It doesn't mean that they'll get a test. You'll notice that on the news, they'll say one thing and then they'll say another thing. It's because it's just not really clear. It's still a very gray area. Bottom line is, if someone's symptomatic, separate them and still do your same precautions. Examples that, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, I want to just ask you a question. We have a question that is, what is you talk a lot about disinfecting. What does that actually mean? Because I don't know that that everybody knows exactly what it means to disinfect. What's the best type of product, or just what are we looking for? What does disinfecting really mean when we talk about cleaning it?
Yep. So depending on the work site will depend on what you're allowed to use. Manufacturing businesses know what is allowed in their manufacturing and what is not, but simple bleach and water. So whether it's a Lysol, a Clorox brand, disinfectant wipes, it needs to say disinfectant, and almost always on the label, if you're a smaller business and you're doing it yourself or you're getting it for your cleaning crew, on the labels you'll see 99.9% kills viruses. Those are the ones you're looking for. This is not the time to use your natural Myers products. Unfortunately, I do use them in my own home, so I'm just throwing that out there. I'm using good old-fashioned Clorox spray right now.
But if you can't, if you can't find, because it's hard right now in the stores to find disinfectant, but are you saying that you could actually just take bleach and use sort of a bleach water mix?
Yep, and good old Google will give you the recipe on what's appropriate. Now, do not, I caution you, if you're making it yourself, please don't do it extra strong. It will make you sick. The fumes from bleach are terrible. You can smell it as soon as you take the lid off of a bleach bottle. It's not good. So make sure you're looking at the proper recipes, okay? And the reason why I say that the Myers won't work, it doesn't have that bleach part in it that's killing the virus. Again, that's what I use at home in my kitchen usually, but I've switched to the bleach during this high time. And I don't even have anyone coming throughout my house. It's just, that's the safest thing to do. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, disinfecting your offices, your high traffic areas, your doorknobs, coffee areas. No one likes their coffee to taste like bleach, right? So clean it first thing in the morning, leave it alone, come back in like 5 or 10 minutes, that smell is gone, it's fine to use. If you can't get any bleach, vinegar and baking soda are a very good cleanser. They just don't work as effectively on viruses. And again, recipes for that are online as well.
I've got another question. If an employee tests positive, do we need to notify other employees or customers that they may have been in contact with them?
Yes. So that was the next thing. Before
okay, let's get there.
Yeah. Before we go into that, I do want to make sure. Oh, some examples that I wanted to give in our business, as Paul mentioned, we take calls from workers who get exposed or injured at work. We've had some calls from employees that are, say, grocery workers. They came into contact with someone who was coughing at the store, but they have no symptoms themselves. You might get a lot of questions like that. The CDC is very clear on what to do about those. You watch for the symptoms, you do your good hand washing. There's not a lot to do about that. So I know I keep referring back to the CDC, but if you go back, it'll tell you no risk, low risk, medium risk. Just make sure you're reading those things. That is a common, so I walk down the street and somebody might have had it. We don't know. So we're treating those as basic cold type exposures until you know for sure. So on to the question on what do you do and what are you required to do if one of your employees tests positive for COVID-19. Depending on your work environment, You may need to close the area completely that they were at and decontaminate it. OSHA has very specific recommendations. I've also put a link to the OSHA coronavirus specific recommendations into the PowerPoint. For areas that you might need to close, if you had 20 people in a manufacturing type environment, they're all in that same space, you're going to want to get everybody out of that space and clean the whole area. Then you identify anyone that had direct contact with them and notify them quickly. So again, they can follow the CDC recommendations. They monitor for symptoms. They don't necessarily have to self-quarantine. And then if they're symptomatic, they call their primary care doctor or the health department. The primary care doctors are the ones who are really going to be deciding what's going to happen with the patient. So if they had direct contact with the person that is positive, meaning they actually touched them, things like that, they were in close personal space for a prolonged period of time. I didn't look at the CDC this morning to see if they changed it. I believe they considered 30 minutes a prolonged period of time. It's not a 1-minute conversation. If the person sneezed on them and didn't cover their face and protect from that sneeze, that would be considered direct contact. And those folks would want to quarantine for the 14 days. And again, the CDC is changing these recommendations frequently, so you'll want to look at that. Make sure that's still accurate. They'll monitor for symptoms at least twice a day. That includes taking temperatures, seeing if they have a cough, body aches. Write it down. That's something that I think folks forget about. If you take a temperature now, you may not remember what it is tonight, and you may think it was higher than what it really was. You may think that you had symptoms when you didn't. So when they're monitoring for these symptoms, recommend they write it down, a little journal entry almost. And that's helpful for their doctors too, should they become symptomatic. Now, OSHA does not give any specific, when I was on the site this morning, they have not changed specifically how long to clean the area for, how long to leave it empty for. So clean it and then you can re-enter the area after everything has dried. The next resource for if someone tests positive would be the CDC. Obviously, I've discussed that multiple times. CDC recommends you educate your employees ahead of time on the symptoms, watch for symptoms, encourage them to stay home if they're sick, perform the routine cleaning that we've talked about, and then eliminate all unnecessary travel. I know in our company, we generally travel quite a bit. Petra, I know, travels as well. We've pretty much eliminated all travel right now. So if you're able to do that, that's great. Working remotely, if possible. Again, not everyone can do that. Separating those who are sick if you can't work remotely, and identify those possible exposures quickly.
Sheree, let me ask you a couple more questions that are coming in.
Yeah.
From Amanda, if an employee tests positive and has been in contact with customers, how would we handle that situation? Paul, maybe you have an idea on that too.
So from a public health standpoint, if they test positive, the health department has stopped doing the case tracking and notifying every person that's come in contact with that person. It depends on the business, how much really is the right thing to do as far as notifying the customer. I think the right thing to do is, depending on the business, a grocery store is a hard one. You don't know who came through that person's line. You're not going to put a sign up saying, we had this employee test positive necessarily. If you're more a one-on-one sales business, sometimes like we are, and we were in direct contact in a meeting, the right thing to do would be to notify that customer that that person has tested positive. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Logistically, there's too many issues with like you mentioned, the grocery store versus a small retailer that might be able to track that sort of traffic better.
But there is no CDC guidelines for that. It's more of just how how you
Correct.
want to handle it. It's almost more of a, I want to say a moral decision, but it's sort of like just sort of what you think is the best thing for you to do for you and for your business and for that client. I could see that being really
Yeah.
important.
So, and it's the right thing to do is if you can notify them, absolutely notify them. Part of what we see on the news every day, part of the problem with this COVID-19 is we don't know when we're sick. So if you have a positive person and you know you're positive, you need to tell that next person because they could be spreading it to many others for the next 5 to 10 days. So the sooner you notify them, the better, but there's no guideline on it, and the health department has stopped doing that, tracking where it came from, just because it's so rampant.
I've got one more question, even though it came from Greg. I think it's actually from my wife, disguised as Greg. What about handling packages, boxes? You know, everybody's getting deliveries right now, and you know, I know the other day we got a shipment of stuff, and my wife was out there with Clorox wipes wiping every package down, including what she brought in from the grocery store. What are the thoughts, and how does that work?
So it's a funny question because I'm a big Amazon shopper. So I am experiencing the same things myself. The CDC has actually recommended most recently, I have not seen it on their website yet, but I did see it from a CDC employee at a press conference. Open those packages up. If you have gloves, you could wear them. I personally would say don't waste them. But if you want to wear gloves and open those packages, open the packages, take your items out, take the packages that they came in out to the recycle bin right away if you recycle, or out to the trash. Wash your hands. If you're concerned about what's in the box, depends on how long it took to get to you. We don't know how long the virus lasts. They say up to 72 hours, but they don't really know. That means it could become non-transferable at an hour, or it could take up to 72 hours. They're saying it lives on cardboard for 24 hours, but it may only be on there for 3 hours. These are all those gray questions that no one knows the answer to. So best practice is, especially right now, why it's still so prevalent with those numbers going up, is take it out of the packages, get rid of your package, wash your hands. The other tip that I would give, if you're opening packages, whether it's from the grocery store, etc., if you're wiping down those items on the outside with bleach, obviously not the real food, you'll want to make sure those are completely dry before you put them away. You don't want to be putting things away wet either. So just make sure you're using that good common sense that, yes, we want them to be clean, but the germs only live for so long. Hopefully.
Yeah, somebody posted in our chat that the CDC notes that novel coronavirus to persons from surface contaminated with the virus has not been documented. So maybe I think it's probably just one of those things that maybe just feels like it should be. We have another question, kind of, I think a little bit going back to the notification. What is your recommendation for notifying employees that work in an office setting together in cubicles if one of those employees tests positive? How do we really notify people?
Well, depends on how big your company is. Smaller companies, probably you could do a face-to-face. Sometimes I think that's a better way to bring that up. It helps ease the fear versus just an email, this person is positive. Larger company, unfortunately, email is probably going to be the way. If they're in a cubicle that's across the room, we have a pretty large office here. And even if I had someone that was positive on the far side of the room, everybody in the room should be notified. That's the right thing to do. Whatever your normal method of communication is with them, that's what you should really make sure that you're continuing with. If you have an intranet, we do a lot of communications via Microsoft Teams. If you do email, if you have an app that you communicate with, whatever your normal mode of communication is with your staff, that's what you should do. And definitely everybody should be notified if you have an internal employee.
Yeah. So definitely
positive.
for smaller teams, you definitely want to make sure that you get everybody together and talk about it, and make sure that, I think what you're saying is make sure that if you are in a smaller office, maybe separate them as best you can. And then what about for employees, sending employees out for catered food? I know that's a big question right now. We're all bringing in food. Or a lot of people are bringing in from restaurants and different things. What's the risk right now with bringing in food from restaurants that are, to going it, or having employees go out? What's the risk to employees we look at for employees that are going out and bringing back food maybe for the office?
So that's the same risk as your Amazon delivery package. So there have not been any documented cases of anyone contracting the virus from takeout or from delivery or from getting food from a restaurant. That being said, everyone should still really be following that 6-foot distance recommendation. I got takeout last night. The employees at the restaurant stayed 6 feet away from me. They put my food down. They put my bill down. I paid. They brought it back. We stayed very separated. Not all businesses are doing that. So making sure if you're sending the staff member out to get the food, make sure that they know they really need to keep that 6-foot distance, and that folks they come into contact with may not be keeping that distance. So you do the best that you can. As far as it transmittable through food, that just has not even, the CDC is not concerned about the food itself. It would be, transferring on the cardboard or the bag or whatever you brought the food back in. If I personally were to walk into a restaurant and someone was visibly ill, I may say, thank you, but no thank you. I don't think that's really an issue these days. Most of the states have put out individual legislation about those things. Hopefully that answers that question. Was there another one, Jason?
No.
Okay.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
I do have one. Do you have from Erica? Do you have recommended messaging regarding the announcement to your team if someone has been tested positive? It's not a time to be mad at them or resentful. So how do you keep this message right? I could see that.
Me too.
I could see somebody, getting really upset in the workplace. What's the right kind of messaging for that? What do you think? I think it's a hard, because it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
It's going to happen. So
It's
what's the right way?
And there's going to be a blame game, and they might, human nature is to make someone at fault for something, unfortunately. So I would recommend, I personally would reach out to our human resources manager to develop a set, and do this ahead of time. Do not wait until you have a positive. Have it ready ahead of time for how you're going to communicate that out. In the communication, I would include things that address if they're blaming that person. An example, and this is just off top of my head because I hadn't thought about it yet, is I know that this can be stressful, but we are all in this together, things like that, making sure that they know that we're all a team together, we're a family. No one is out there purposely infecting people, at least I hope not, especially if they're on your in-house team. But making sure that the way the message is delivered, you have those positive things by addressing their fears at the same time. Hopefully, I know it's a little bit gray, but definitely address the fear and the anger in the email that you send out.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And there's a lot of small companies that might not have HR, so it's really important that if you are a small company, you're probably close to as a family working together, and that person, whoever gets it, is going to be as devastated as that person's got it is going to be really devastated to potentially infect people. So I think we have to be mindful of that, but if you see something you feel, make sure people know that it's safe for them not to come to work. If they're not feeling well, they should not come to work. That's first and foremost, but it's important that if they do, and there's risk that it's, that obviously it's, they're going to feel bad, and the team needs to support that with whatever risk has happened. What are the HIPAA concerns?
Jason, one other thing on that too, and it goes into this next question on HIPAA. There are many, well, I myself am getting from different law firms great information, great webinars in terms of the answers to this topic too. So I would encourage everybody to be working with an employment attorney, or at least reviewing webinars that many of these firms are putting out to get guidance on what they should and shouldn't do. Because of course you don't want this to turn into a legal issue or well, basically a lawsuit from an employee who was exposed to it, who perhaps the employer improperly notified other employees and possibly customers of that issue. So get guidance from your employment law resources.
Paul, maybe you know this. What's that word? And sure, maybe you know this. What are the HIPAA laws with that? You know, if somebody gets it, are you allowed to say, you know, now in a small office, it's probably going to be known, right? There's no way that's not going to be known in sort of a small office. You know, Johnny was here yesterday. Johnny's not here today. Johnny was coughing yesterday. You know, we might know that. But in a little bit of a bigger company, is that name supposed to be known? Do we have to keep that confidential? What's the best way of handling that?
So HIPAA with communicable diseases, when it is potentially affecting the person that you're telling, HIPAA is kind of excluded. That being said, we don't go around telling everybody so-and-so has the flu. And this is very similar to that, and I think it has a big stigma with that, which is why Paul was mentioning, make sure you're talking with your employment lawyers. They're making specific laws related to COVID-19. So you'll want to make sure you reach out to your resources on what is allowed. But in general, communicable diseases, if someone has had contact, direct contact with that person, HIPAA is not an issue. Hopefully that answers that question. Definitely reach out to whoever your resources are, though, for current legislation, because I think, Paul, aren't we getting new legislation almost every day regarding this in one way or another?
Yeah, daily. And last week there was an announcement that came out that whoever enforces it, I'm losing track of who does what, but whoever enforces the HIPAA protections is providing some sort of leniency to medical providers, for example, in providing guidance to consumers, employees, and so forth out there for helping them with COVID-19. So the idea is that they didn't want people to not deliver assistance, to not deliver advice for fear of being prosecuted under the HIPAA statutes.
Yeah, and the other thing we did not touch on that, since we were talking about the legislation changing pretty regularly, make sure you're staying up to date on Family Medical Leave Act, whether your employee is sick, if they have a family member who's sick, if they're missing work due to their children being out of school. There's so much legislation going on regarding that you really need to be checking the federal ones and your state regulations on that. I'm not an expert in that by any means, but I do know stuff is getting changed with that pretty regularly. So,
yeah, and I know we've put out some, you know, we're keeping up to date, and we've written some things about it. And as it continues to change, we'll continue to update that. But I think it's really important to still check the federal websites and understand state websites about what is legal, because it's really important to know.
and have those saved. Again, have a key contact person, whether you're small or big, someone who's in charge of knowing that particular information. That way you have your go-to person, and do it ahead of time. Do it before somebody gets sick. So there was a little bit of delay in my slide here, but we pretty much have went over all of this. The last thing was just establish that communication plan. I think we've really talked about that already, whether it be email, in person, however you normally communicate with your employees. And start doing that now. I recommend Paul is doing a video message to our employees at least twice a week, just what's going on with us. And then I can put in my little reminder as a nurse, wash your hands, you know, don't be around sick people, stay away, you know, things like that. And it's really helping calm the fears of what's going on in general. The next slide, I have the stuff we've already went over about OSHA. They've got a specific link related to COVID-19, and what you should be doing to see if you have a work site that would potentially have more exposure. It has the link for the proper hand hygiene and what to do about possible exposure. So you've got CDC recommendations and OSHA recommendations. Those of you that have manufacturing businesses and even delivery drivers, things like that, that are more focused on OSHA, it's really specific there. Click on the link and you'll find all the information you need to know. Make sure you're keeping up to date on those state legislative changes. Have your local health department and state health department phone numbers. If you live in a big city, you'll have a local, like for us, Phoenix is a big city. It has its own number, plus we have an Arizona number. There's also hotlines just for COVID-19. Look at your state health department website. Almost every single one, I went through them earlier in the week, almost every one has specific COVID-19 that you can have for reference for your employees. So the main thing is just being prepared with the information ahead of time, giving your employees the support to let them know that you're here, you know, you understand what's going on, is really going to help calm the fears and protect your business, their safety, their family safety, and overall the general public.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One of the things that I know we're recommending to all of our members is have a plan. Go with the assumption that somebody is going to get it.
They will.
Just make the assumption. What's the plan that you're going to have? Don't have that already set, ready to go. You don't want to be scrambling for this. You want to be prepared. So figure out, what is your communication? How are you going to handle it? What's the plan of action you're going to take if somebody gets it? Be prepared. It's the most important thing. And then the other part what you talked about was communication. Communication, I cannot stress enough. You know, if everybody's working in stressful times, the more you communicate, the better it's going to be for your team, right? So think about that. Think about whatever communication rhythms you had before this, they're not going to work right now. You need to change them. They need to be more. I know at Petra, we've gone from just having a morning huddle. We've also added an afternoon huddle. We've also increased the time of each huddle. So it's one of those things where, you know, we've changed our communication. You need to be more proactive with the communication that you have.
If I could add one thing to that too, I just want to give the disclaimer that as I mentioned earlier, we did a deep dive into COVID-19 to help our clients with all these issues, as well as ourselves in our own work environment. We are not experts. We are not providing any legal advice. We are not lawyers. All I can do, what we're telling you though, is what we've done, and really urge you to seek out guidance from your legal staff or in your city or town. Find the best employment law firm and sign up for their newsletters, because they're putting stuff out daily about what's happening. So just wanted to give that caveat, because we are not lawyers. We are not experts on OSHA or CDC or the,
Nope.
or the
Nice coverage.
So
Well, thank you, Shuri.
Yeah, I think Henry has a little bit to add at the end for the technology part. Sorry, I took the whole time, Henry, there.
No, this was great. Thank you, Shuri. I think there's a couple of questions you might want to circle back on in the Q&A. So thank you, everyone, for joining. One of the things that obviously has become clear through this situation with COVID is the need for business continuity planning. Some of this may seem like, well, I didn't have a business continuity plan, what now? Well, remote work is obviously, in this case, something very important to all of us. About 2 years ago, we set off on a mission to be what we call serverless in Scottsdale. We had a casino down the road that was out of commission for over a month. They lost millions of dollars. And being on the same path of them in terms of electricity, we wanted to make sure that if that happened to our office, that our employees could work remotely. So we built into our business continuity plan this idea of everyone working remote. We've had our contact center agents already working remotely about 50% of the time, or 50% of them. But one thing that you may not think about is that optimizing your workforce will actually lower your ongoing IT support costs and boost productivity. And the reason I say that is, if you do this right, you will actually be simplifying your IT environment, your architecture, to make remote work possible. So here's a few things to consider to how do you simplify your environment. And again, this may not apply to every business. I know some of you have restaurants or production facilities, but even if you have those, for your sales staff or your administrative staff, you need to be thinking about these things. So the first one is what's called BYOD. So the ability to bring your own device to work. This started initially with companies allowing employees to use their own iPhones and connecting them to applications like Office 365 or Google for business. But this isn't just for smartphones. We have, in fact, our executive admin was a high-risk person, and we wanted to make sure that she was able to work from home early. She had a Mac at home. We made it work thanks to the technology that we had in place. Another thing is what the industry is now calling zero trust security, and that doesn't mean that there's no trust. It just means that for every application and service that you provide, you're actually verifying and validating the credentials for that individual to access that application. So what does that mean? We've made it really simple for our staff. They've got one password, and that one password gets them into every one of the services that we provide. We use password vaults for our IT administrators so that they don't, so that we can share passwords securely. We use multi-factor authentication, which is a really important aspect of single sign-on. You want to make sure that you're protecting your services from hackers. It's even more important as you're sending folks home. The idea of using 2 factors of authentication, so whether that's your cell phone or an authenticator app on your phone, it's really easy to do that today. And then the other thing is we migrated to a web access only. So for our contact center agents, the only thing they need to get going, and really now for our staff, for our executive staff as well, is a web browser. And then architecture. So I mentioned architecture early, but I would argue all of you out there, unless you're in the business of IT, IT is not your core competency. Our core competency and core purpose is to lessen the pain of workers' comp. And so we set out to focus on a software as a service first. So software like Salesforce, Office 365. And when we couldn't find a SaaS solution for what we use, well, we made sure that those systems, our proprietary system with our guidelines and our distribution engine, was in the cloud with AWS. Again, very important. Another key thing that you may not be taking advantage of today, so whether you're using Slack or Teams, and I'm not recommending one over the other, they're both excellent tools. They both have free versions. The free version of Teams, I think, allows for up to 2 gigs of personal storage per person, up to a couple 100,000 users per organization. And then consider your video conferencing. For those of you that are stuck on an old Skype, I feel for you. Zoom is obviously what we're using today, and very easy to get set up and can really boost your ability to communicate with your staff. As Cherie mentioned, Paul is putting out a video twice a week, and we've had great success with that. And then another very important, go ahead.
Let me throw something out there with that, Henry. I think one of the things that's really important, I had this challenge today. A lot of people are working from home and they're using their home computer. And what I would recommend is, we do recommend using Zoom. We think that through communications, if people are used to seeing each other, they still need to see each other. So doing everything via some video channel, whether it be Zoom or Google Hangouts, whatever works for your organization. One of the best things you can do is invest in just a camera for that you can plug in. You know, they plug into USB, they plug into the computers, they can, and give somebody video access. It's really important that people see each other to remain connected. The connectivity of people is extremely important, and it needs to be visual. And if you do use something like Zoom or Hangouts, they actually have apps, so you can, you'll be able to see, you can do it on your phone too, not just on your computer. So,
thanks,
sorry.
Jason. And then finally, and this might seem weird coming from the technologist, but be very mindful of your culture. Let's see, my slide didn't advance here. Be deliberate about keeping the rhythms that, the water cooler rhythms that happen at work. we're having more and more of these Zoom meetings with our team, a daily check-in. We're having theme days. I think we've got a Star Wars day coming up that I'm excited about personally. But just keep it informal. Keep your culture alive in these times, and Zoom is a great way to do that. And then if we don't have any questions on technology, I want to turn it over quickly to Deborah to tell you how you can learn more about Company Nurse.
Thanks, Henry. I'm kind of superfluous to this conversation, but just wanted to share with you, and Paul explained our business at the top of the session, which is to lessen the pain of workers' comp for employers and their employees by offering injury reporting and triage services to help them at the point of injury. So we have been very deeply involved in the COVID-19 situation because our job is to help our clients, employers and their employees. So if you'd like to have more information about our services, please feel free to contact us. We're happy to meet via Zoom as well. And you can do that by sales@companynurse.com. So I'm hoping to speak with some of you and help you with these services.
Jason, any more questions?
No, I think we're good. I think we're good. Any final thoughts from you, and I'll wrap it up.
Well, one thing is, and I think Cherie touched on it, but mental health side. So this is a question that came in from my wife, Donna, and she said that talking about being able to check in, especially with isolated employees, what's important to do in these times to make sure that all of your employees, especially the isolated employees, are checked on and feeling part of the team.
And so on that note too, Paul, another important thing is if you've got those isolated team members and they can't get out to get their food, or they're high risk or things like that, our company culture is we're like a family. So maybe have someone assigned to them or volunteer to help go get them groceries and leave it on their doorstep. Especially if you're used to being able to do those things yourself. If you've got someone who's at home now, they're separated, they can't get to the store, all these things start adding up. So on a nursing standpoint, mental health for me is number one for this particular outbreak that we're having. And then your hand hygiene and staying away from sick is number two. If we're not mentally well, you can't fight off the illness. So good point.
Right.
Right.
Jason?
I really appreciate you putting together. Kind of my thoughts at the end here is that it's really important to create a plan and go with the assumption that somebody is going to get it and what you need to do. So things we talked about is if somebody gets it, how are you isolating the team? How are you making sure that it's clean and making it safe? How do you message it out, whether that be to just your internal team or also to your customers? This is the time to be really prepared, and then focus on communication with your team throughout this. It's a big, scary time right now, and your team is looking to you as the leader to lead through this. And so be proactive, have the plan, be ready to go. It's vitally important.
Jason,
So
one last thing on that too is documentation. For the whole exposure issue, make sure that there's complete documentation when, how, who, when, what, why, and where on the whole exposure incident that they're reporting on.
So, all right, that's great. Great point. Thank you everybody for joining. We have another webinar coming up this Friday on the 27th. It's an IT town hall. Keeping your company safe, the 4 steps you must take immediately to ensure your data is protected. You can go to our website, and I suggest everybody go to our website, petracoach.com. There's a link right on the front page for COVID and all the information we have on there. You'll see the link to the website, to this, the next coming up webinar. Additionally, this webinar we posted later on today. We will have the webinar back up online, as well as sort of a brief summary article that we are putting together. So it'll be put together for you to read, but there's a lot of other things on there, and highly recommend you do that. And if assistance or you need anything else, please reach out to info@petra.coach.com. I don't even know our website anymore. info@petracoach.com. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and have a great day.